And that's the mistake we ask when we answer that question wrongly. We're in the business of typewriters now. Whenever I hear we're in the business of, and they describe the product, I know there's going to be a problem, or the service. When you describe it in terms of the bigger question, and this really resonated with me, then that can take you anywhere. And those organisations that have really kept up to date, revolutionised their services, that's exactly what the way they're thinking. Actually, we're in a different business than the business we thought we were in. So for example, some of you in your community organisations or your professional community organisations, you're in the business of changing people's lives, for example. That's a better way to describe what you do than we deliver this particular service. Because then you say, as a senior team or any team delivering that organisation, okay, if we're in the business of changing people's lives, what does that enable us to do? Where could we go with that? Where does it overlap with what someone else is doing around changing someone else's life, changing people's lives? And it's a better conversation. It also, and why I say every 6 months, it brings you back to why we're really here. Because it won't surprise, I do a lot of work in education, and I'm constantly quite sad about the fact that a number of the schools and colleges I work with, a number of their people who work there are demotivated. And I don't understand that. Let alone understand why there might be people working in Jewish hunting organisations who don't love their jobs. How is that possible? You work in education and you don't love your job. But you know, the reality of life hits you. And sometimes you forget and are not reminded what you really do, because you get into the drudge of it. So you start to hate your job, and actually then you start to resent your organisation, and you forget about, well, I'm in education and I'm changing young people's lives. And those of you...
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating, although, in a way, because I was thinking you could update the example with Kodak, for example, now rather. But how important those are the past? Because if you're a new company or a new service or a new charity, then you have, and you start the right way, you have the opportunity to define yourself that way. But if you're Kodak, for example, it's very hard to divorce the past that they create, and that's often what brings people down. Even if they have good intention, the past will still hamper their efforts because of just because of the journey they've been on already.
Yeah, it's going to sound, I apologise because it's going to sound a bit trite, but it is about honouring the past, because Kodak shouldn't just go, you know what, we're going to go into making computers. It has to have some link to visual images or whatever. I don't know the Kodak business. So it has to be something about the best of what they were trying to do. So for example, if I was Kodak, and I seem to remember adverts like this in the 80s, when they used the Louis Armstrong theme tune and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Their stuff was about sort of people having memories and life memories and stuff. That's what I would be building on. Now you're absolutely right to say to me, well, what happens if we've got a whole lot of factories that build old cameras? And we've got a whole lot of workers who only know how to build old cameras. So that's the transition you have to make. But you should have been thinking about that, because the bit I'm going to come on to now, 10 years before it happened. But because you were doing this, it suddenly hits you and you go, uh-oh, we've got factories and workers who are not up to date, and the marketplace has moved on. If you'd seen the signs 10 years before, like some companies did, and some organisations did, then that wouldn't hit you as hard. This is the theme of my thing. You have to be able to see it earlier on. So, the first thing I want to say is, the other reason to say what business you're in is, I believe the #1 job of a strategic leader, whatever that is not something complicated. It's just as simple as this: be clear. And I have a quote that I love using in regard to this. Clarity is the antidote to anxiety. Okay? There's a lot of anxiety when people aren't clear, and when their job becomes a job and it becomes a drudge, and then there's the strategic drift, and they drift away from the core purpose of why they came here to do this great thing. And that can apply as much in Kodak as it can apply in a community organisation. Because I get asked this, you know, why do people love working for Aston Martin? It's a, you know, it's a metal box on wheels that I'll never be able to afford. They love working there. Well, that's okay. You know, I don't resent them for it, but I do resent. I actually do resent the implication that the opposite of that you can't be fantastically really engaged with an organisation that makes, you know, a car. So those people go into work largely, most of them go to work and are excited about their job and they love what they do. Yet I go into a further education college and I see people wandering around going, "Oh, I hate this, I hate our student team, those bloody students," and all the rest of it. So there's something going on there. Now, with that in mind, I think there are two approaches to strategy that we should take. There's the one that I see all too often still. You've got something, you have a look and say, "I've got this thing, what do you want?" "Well, oh, okay, well I've got this thing, you should have it." I know it's not quite what you wanted, but have it, okay? So that's what we call kind of, you're led by the resources that you have. And that is the Kodak example when they're stuck. Because they go, "Well, we've got all this stuff. So we'll keep trying to flog those old cameras. And we'll just hope that maybe there's a nostalgia, something nostalgic." And that's also been done successfully by some organizations. But I would argue that the more important way to look at this is to do this. And this is why they've fallen into these traps, a lot of them. What's going on in the world out there? What consequently, if we're talking about the Jewish world, or if we're just talking about another organization working, what's going on in our sector, if you want to call it that, our industry, our sector, or the Jewish world, and how can we benefit from, respond to, and meet those trends? So instead of being resource-led, you're actually opportunity-led. Now all of us talk about this, but we don't do enough of it. So many clients turn around to me and say, "Oh yeah, we've got a research department that has a look around to see what's going on." And when you investigate that, it's a bit tokenistic. What we're talking about here is people who can take a long view. Because actually, I don't think we need to be actually responding to is behind the game. What we need to be is initiating. So we need to know what's coming, as opposed to responding to what's already there. So this outside-in approach is absolutely critical. So I have a way of looking at this, and people call me a bit structured and a bit anal about all of this. And I'm quite chilled about it, but I do believe there is a process. There's a whole community of business thinkers currently going, strategy is dead. It's a turbulent world. It's so changing so fast. There's no room anymore for strategy. Actually, it's the opposite as far as I'm concerned. It's just how you do it. So I still believe that we need to do good strategic analysis that leads to realizing what's going on, that leads to good choices and decisions, that leads to taking some action. And my strategy funnel, adapted from things that I've seen, goes like this. These are the key things I think we should be doing. So if we're talking about the Jewish community, first of all, what's going on out there beyond the community? What's going on in the world that affects us in here? Secondly, what's going on in the community in its widest sense across the world that affects us in here? Thirdly, what's going on in our organisation here? How well equipped are we for the future of visual imagery and creating memories for people? So how well set is our organisation to respond to what's going on in the two things above it? Now most people, when they do strategy, they start actually where that green question mark is. And what they do is they do a little SWOT analysis. So already what I've done in 30 minutes, and it really can be done in 30 minutes, is I've gone like that. Now some of you will say, well, you can't do this. And I say it's the kind of that worries me. We've got people with very broad thinking. Yeah, that's good. But what I've done here is I've put myself through a disciplined process to think more broadly. Okay? And I think that's important. Now, for those of you who know Pestle, I'm just going to sort of see with you another thing you might find interesting, and you can look this up for yourselves beyond this. There's a great book came out in the last few years called Flip. It kind of just takes what we know and flips it on its head about lots of stuff. But a really nice piece in that flip, and it's a bit like an alternative to Pestle, and I sometimes use them together, is to put these four factors that are going on in our modern world and analyse that same question against these. Think about it. This is how our world has become. This has particularly been true over the last few years. This is amazingly true. The example that was used to me is, you know, you go to buy a pair of jeans nowadays, they're like 40,000 different types. Whereas if you're buying a pair of jeans in the 1960s, there was like, you know, 2. But TED.com, there's a guy on there called Barry Schwartz. Great guy. And he particularly talks about this rising expectations thing. He's a professor of social theory, which is a job I just think I'd love if I had to see what it was. And what Barry Schwartz talks about is he gives the jeans example. And he says the funny thing is, we buy the jeans eventually, and they're the best jeans we'd ever had, much better than the ones we would have bought in the 60s, because you know there's so many types of them. He says, and we walk out and we feel less satisfied than we would have in the 1960s. And in fact, he wrote a whole book about that topic. So expectations are rising, we know. Whether it be about the environment in which we deliver our services in, or whatever it may be. So these are big factors for us now. But what this is all about for me is just about getting clearer. Clearer about what's going on out there that affects us in here, and what we're going to do about it, and then being able to become a lot clearer about what business we're in. So that each of us in the same team or organization pretty much answers the same to that question, what business are you in? I call this the clarity pyramid. And it's only got 4 parts, the strategic plan. Okay? 4 parts. The first one is this. We have to be clear about where we're heading. Now people say, oh, you've got a mission statement and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's up on the wall, it's lovely, and yeah. Produce those little credit cards, everyone's got one in their wallet, it's great. Or either the mission statement in many cases is not very good, sorry, or it's great but nobody knows what it is or does anything with it. So, number 1, we have to have a declaration of intent, and that's because so that all of our people and all of our stakeholders beyond our people are clear where we're heading. We need to be heading somewhere. So a mission statement for me is about a mission to somewhere. It doesn't describe what we do. It describes where we want to be. So the best mission statement ever, and I know some of you think this is controversial, was to announce in 1961 that we'll land on the moon by the end of the decade. Controversial because I know some of you believe we never did. One bit into that. Back to the Kodak thing, photography. But that was the best mission statement you could put out. Because what you said to the American people, because they caught the zeitgeist of that time, this was important, nowadays people wouldn't care. Because of the Cold War, and because of the space race, it caught the imagination of the American people to say, we're going to be on the moon by the end of the decade. And the American people went, fantastic. And imagine what, therefore the people in NASA went, oh, come on, brilliant. So that obviously means the trip to Mars is off. That little department doing all that funny stuff over there, finished. Because when you're clear about where we're heading, you avoid strategic drift. You stop doing all the stuff you shouldn't be doing. And I can assure you, they focus their efforts on getting to the moon. The second question is, if that's the mission, well, tell us the plan that will get us there. We talk about strategic objectives, strategic aims. Actually, that's basically the plan that will get us there. That's the 5 or 6 key things. And there should only be 5 or 6. The 5 or 6 key things that are going to deliver the mission. I'm putting it in this simple pyramid because everyone in the organisation and the external stakeholders should be able to get it. Whatever job they do. The third question to answer is to go down the left-hand side of this. How will we know if we're getting there? What are those, and I'm quite prescriptive about this just to make it easier. If you've got 5 strategic aims, you should have 10 key success measures. Probably, around about. What are the key success measures? And I'm not going to call them KPIs. I'll tell you why I'm not going to call them KPIs, because KPIs has been ruined by the fact that we end up having 35 KPIs. Well, they can't be KPIs, they'll just be PIs, won't they? Okay? So, what are the key success measures that we need that will tell us how we're doing on our journey towards our mission? The key things that will tell us how we're doing against those strategic aims. And I quite like, if I can, to match them up against those strategic aims, 2 per strategic aim, if I can. And finally, the one that often people are surprised about, because it doesn't often appear in the strategic plan, but I think is critical, what people will need to be like to get us there. So what we're describing here are the behaviours that we will need from people in order to deliver the strategy. Those 4 skills, the networking, observing, etc., they're quite good to think about. To what extent am I doing those 4 things? I hope it's been useful, and thank you very much.